Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, as the world outside slowly quiets down and the day begins to loosen its grip on you, we're stepping into the darker, quieter corridors of history. Not the loud battles or glorious victories, but the hidden rooms where power whispered, faith hardened, and desire was never spoken aloud. Tonight's story drifts through medieval kingdoms where kings ruled by day and disappeared into silence by night, through secret brotherhoods bound by vows, wealth, and unanswered questions, through towering cathedrals built stone by hands that never saw the whole, and finally, across open seas where power belonged not to birth or belief, but to discipline, law, and understanding human nature. This is not a story about shock or scandal. It's a calm journey through how power truly worked, how it shaped desire, how faith tried to contain it, and what price was always paid in the end. A gentle history for sleep, where medieval kings, secret orders, sacred buildings, and forgotten leaders are connected by one silent thread: the human need to control uncertainty. So, before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, slow your breathing, and let history soften into rest. By day, they ruled kingdoms. By night, history closed its eyes. When we imagine medieval kings, we often picture crowns heavy with gold, thrones carved from oak, and banners snapping in cold stone halls. But power, when absolute, does not sleep the way ordinary people do. It watches, it waits, and sometimes it bends inward. This is not a story about scandal or crude indulgence. This is a story about what happens when no one is allowed to say no. In the medieval world, kings were not merely leaders, they were symbols. Their bodies belonged to the state. Their marriages were contracts signed between bloodlines, not hearts. Affection was optional, duty was not. And intimacy, stripped of choice and warmth, often became something colder, quieter, and far more unsettling. When a man is surrounded by silence, even his desires begin to echo strangely. Court life trained everyone to look away. Servants learned to enter rooms without seeing. Confessors learned to listen without reacting. Chroniclers learned what to write, and more importantly, what to omit. The result was a peculiar kind of darkness, not loud, not dramatic, but thick like velvet curtains drawn at night. In such silence, control became a language. Kings who could command armies with a word found themselves unable to command affection, so they learned to observe instead, to test loyalty, to arrange rituals that blurred devotion and obedience, to surround themselves with rules so strict that intimacy became another form of governance. These were not acts of passion, they were acts of power searching for reassurance. In many royal chambers, love was absent, but structure was everywhere. Beds were placed by protocol, visits occurred by schedule, witnesses waited behind doors, close enough to hear breathing, far enough not to intervene. Over time, desire lost its warmth and became something else entirely, an obsession with order, with submission, with being obeyed even in the most private moments. Medieval faith only deepened this contradiction. Kings were taught that their authority came from God, yet their bodies reminded them of human weakness. Between prayer and temptation, many rulers built secret routines, nightly habits wrapped in ritual.
confessions that revealed nothing, penance that never touched the source. These patterns were not recorded in detail, not because they were unknown, but because medieval history preferred metaphor to exposure, shadows instead of descriptions, whispers instead of evidence. And so the kings we now call perverted were not monsters hiding crimes in the dark. They were lonely men surrounded by absolute obedience, slowly confusing control with comfort. Their courts became mirrors, reflecting only what they wished to see. Over time, the line between governance and compulsion blurred. Surveillance replaced trust, ceremony replaced affection, silence replaced truth. History did not erase them, it simply chose not to describe them. And yet their presence lingers in the gaps, between the lines of manuscripts, in the sudden pauses of chroniclers, in the strange rules that governed royal bedrooms. These are the traces we follow tonight, gently, quietly, without judgment. Because this is not a tale meant to awaken curiosity alone. It is a calm descent into how power, when unchallenged, learns to turn inward. And as these kings ruled their desires in silence, others, watching from cloisters and altars, learned a different lesson: how faith itself could become a form of control.
And while kings ruled their desires in silence, others learned to rule power through faith. Beyond the torchlit corridors of palaces, another form of authority was quietly growing. One that did not wear crowns but robes. One that did not command armies but consciences. In the medieval world, faith was not simply belief, it was structure. It told people when to wake, when to kneel, when to speak, and when to remain silent. For kings struggling with inner disorder, religion offered something deeply seductive: justification. If power came from God, then desire could be framed as trial, control could be framed as discipline, and secrecy could be framed as holiness. Many rulers began to surround themselves with clerics not for guidance, but for containment. Chapels were built close to bedchambers. Confessors were chosen carefully, sworn to silence stronger than law. Ritual replaced intimacy, prayer replaced reflection, and the night became divided into segments of devotion, obedience, and carefully measured indulgence. What emerged was not corruption in the modern sense, but a fusion. Authority wrapped in sanctity, desire disguised as moral order. Medieval theology emphasized hierarchy: God above king, king above subjects, subjects above nothing. In this vertical world, questioning was rebellion, and refusal was sin. Kings learned quickly that faith could enforce what fear could not. Where commands failed, guilt succeeded. Where law hesitated, doctrine endured. Slowly, the personal habits of rulers became embedded into religious routine. What the king preferred became proper. What unsettled him became impure. And what he feared losing, control, obedience, certainty, was guarded with scripture and ritual. This is why medieval records feel strangely vague around royal intimacy. The language becomes abstract. Acts are described as excess, melancholy, or trials of the flesh. Details dissolve into moral commentary. History did not lack information, it lacked permission. And so the true nature of these kings survived only in shadows, through sudden church reforms, unusual fasting rules, strange prohibitions whispered rather than written. Faith became a mirror that reflected power back onto itself, not to restrain it, but to calm it. Kings who felt watched by God felt less watched by humans. Kings who confessed in private felt absolved in public.
The structure soothed them. The silence protected them. Over time, this alliance between throne and altar created a new form of isolation. The king stood alone, elevated beyond contradiction. Surrounded by obedience, he mistook submission for harmony. Yet beneath the calm surface, the tension remained. Because faith can explain desire, but it cannot dissolve it. And power can silence witnesses, but it cannot silence memory. Medieval history is filled with moments where this balance trembled. Moments of sudden repentance, unexplained pilgrimages, abrupt changes in court behavior. These were not acts of virtue, they were adjustments, corrections made quietly so the structure would not crack. And so the night passed gently over stone castles and cloisters alike. Candles burned low, prayers echoed softly. Kings slept believing order had been restored. But history, even when silent, remembers patterns. It remembers how control learned to speak the language of holiness. And it remembers that what is hidden does not disappear, it merely waits. As we drift deeper into this quiet history, we begin to see that the most unsettling legacy of these kings was not what they did, but what they normalized. A world where obedience felt sacred, where silence felt virtuous, and where power learned that it did not need to shout to be obeyed.
As faith wrapped power in quiet certainty, isolation became the true companion of medieval kings. The higher a ruler stood, the fewer voices could reach him. Councils existed, but agreement was expected. Advisors spoke carefully, shaping words around the king's mood rather than truth. Over time, the court transformed into a place where reflection vanished and reinforcement thrived. Silence was rewarded, hesitation was punished, and the king, surrounded by affirmation, slowly lost the ability to hear anything else. This isolation was not accidental, it was built into the architecture of power. Thrones were elevated, chambers were sealed, curtains were thick, access was controlled by ritual and rank. Every movement toward the king required permission, preparation, and performance. What could not be said openly was absorbed into posture, gesture, and ritual. The result was a ruler who felt constantly observed, yet never truly understood. In such an environment, desire became internalized. Without honest reflection, impulses did not soften, they condensed. Kings began to watch rather than participate, to orchestrate rather than connect. Intimacy, once stripped of spontaneity, became another arena for control, and the court, trained to anticipate rather than respond, complied without comment. Servants learned patterns, courtiers learned timing. No one asked why certain routines repeated nightly. No one questioned why doors remained closed longer than necessary. What was consistent became acceptable. What was hidden became normal. Over generations, this silence shaped memory itself. Chroniclers described reigns through wars and treaties, not through habits and shadows. Official records praised piety, discipline, and order. Personal deviations were absorbed into euphemism or erased altogether. The king's inner life was considered irrelevant or too dangerous to preserve. Yet the court always knew. Knowledge circulated quietly, carried in glances and pauses. Everyone knew what could not be spoken, and everyone understood that survival depended on forgetting aloud. This collective forgetting created a strange stability. Power remained intact because nothing disrupted its image. The king appeared righteous because no one described the cost. In this way,
Perversion did not need expression, it needed accommodation. It needed a system willing to look away, and medieval courts were masters of looking away. They transformed obedience into professionalism, discretion into virtue, emotional distance into loyalty. The king, sensing no resistance, interpreted silence as harmony, but harmony built on fear has a different sound. It hums rather than sings, it lulls rather than comforts, and it leaves behind an emptiness that no ritual can fully fill. Some rulers sensed this emptiness. They commissioned art heavy with symbolism. They founded monasteries. They rewrote rules. These acts were not redemptive gestures. They were attempts to externalize what could not be confronted internally. Power cannot confess to itself. It can only reshape its surroundings. And so the medieval night deepened. Candles flickered. Walls listened. The court slept lightly, aware that order depended on restraint, and restraint depended on silence. Kings dreamed of control, mistaking stillness for peace. But history, even when quiet, records patterns. It shows us that when power is never questioned, it turns inward. When desire is never named, it seeks structure. And when silence is rewarded long enough, it becomes the loudest force of all. This is the world we drift through now, not one of scandal, but of careful omission. And as the court maintained its hush, the stage was quietly prepared for something else, for figures who would no longer rule through crowns or desire, but through doctrine, fear, and permanence. As silence hardened into habit, power began to change shape. What once lived inside a single ruler slowly migrated outward, settling into rooms, offices, rules, and traditions. The medieval world did not rely on one man alone. It learned to preserve authority through systems that could outlive him. This was the quiet genius of the age. Desires no longer needed a king's voice. They were encoded into procedure. Preferences were translated into protocol. Fear was stabilized through routine. And so the court became more than a gathering of people. It became an instrument. In these halls, power no longer needed to feel, it only needed to function. The personal patterns of kings, once guarded by silence, were absorbed into custom. What had been private became expected. What had been unsettling became normalized. Bedchambers acquired rules, schedules replaced spontaneity. Access was filtered through rank and ritual. In this way, the king's inner conflicts were externalized, spread thin across the machinery of governance. No single act appeared excessive. No single rule appeared cruel. Together, they formed a structure that felt inevitable. Institutions have a unique talent for erasing origins. Once a behavior is repeated long enough, it no longer belongs to a person. It belongs to tradition. Medieval courts perfected this transformation. They recorded procedures, not motives. They preserved outcomes, not causes. As generations passed, no one remembered why certain rules existed. They only knew that breaking them felt dangerous. This is how authority learned to survive scrutiny. When questioned, it pointed not to desire, but to precedent, not to will, but to order. In such a world, responsibility dissolved. No one chose, everyone followed. Kings, sensing this shift, found relief. Control no longer depended on personal vigilance. The system watched for them. Confession became administrative. Discipline became ceremonial. And silence became institutional policy. The night routines of palaces grew quieter, more regulated, less human. Candles were placed by instruction, doors opened by signal, movements synchronized with bells and prayers. What had once been an expression of inner tension became a predictable rhythm, and rhythm, repeated gently enough, can feel like peace. But systems carry memory differently than people do. They do not forget, they accumulate. Each small accommodation, each unspoken allowance becomes part of the structure. Over time, the original reason fades, but the effect remains. This is why medieval power feels heavy, even at a distance. It is dense with repetition, thick with inherited silence. By the late medieval period, the king was no longer the sole source of authority, he was its symbol. Power resided in councils, courts, and canon law. Desire, once personal, was now abstract. It expressed itself as control over access, time, and bodies, not through explicit acts, but through regulation. This made it harder to confront and easier to endure. People adapt quickly to systems. They accept what feels permanent, and permanence in medieval Europe was sacred. Stone buildings, eternal doctrines, unchanging rituals. These elements reassured societies that chaos had been contained, that nothing unpredictable would intrude. And yet, beneath this stability, the original imbalance persisted. It simply wore a quieter mask. History reflects this transformation subtly. Chronicles grow formal, language stiffens, emotion drains away. What remains is order, impressive, enduring, and strangely hollow. The personal lives of kings disappear not because they ended, but because they were absorbed, dissolved into something larger, less visible, and more powerful. As we drift toward the edge of this chapter, we begin to understand that the most enduring legacy of these rulers was not their private deviation, but the systems that carried it forward. Power learned to outgrow the individual, to survive morality, to continue without explanation, and in doing so, it prepared the world for figures who would wield authority without ever revealing desire at all.
By the end of the medieval night, power had learned its most valuable lesson. It did not need desire to endure. It needed structure. What began as private imbalance within kings had quietly reshaped the world around them. Control no longer lived in bedrooms or behind curtains. It lived in rules, vows, and institutions that spoke calmly, demanded obedience gently, and justified themselves endlessly. This was the true inheritance of the so-called perverted kings, not scandal, but normalization, a society trained to obey without asking why, to accept silence as virtue, to mistake order for peace. History, written in careful ink, preserved this calm surface. Beneath it, the patterns remained. Desire transformed into surveillance, fear transformed into ritual, and loneliness transformed into systems that promised meaning. By now, the king himself mattered less than the authority he represented. He could die, the structure would remain. And once power discovered it could outlive the individual, it no longer needed the individual to reveal himself. This is how the medieval world prepared for something new. Not rulers defined by appetite, but institutions defined by vows. Not kings ruling by blood, but orders ruling by belief. As royal courts perfected silence, another force stepped forward, one that blended faith, discipline, secrecy, and permanence into a single formidable shape. These were not men driven by personal desire, but by collective purpose. They did not rule kingdoms, they guarded an idea. They slept in armor, they prayed in darkness, they obeyed without question, and for a time they were untouchable. Their rise did not begin in palaces, but on roads marked by dust, pilgrimage, and war. Their authority did not come from crowns, but from promises sworn in sacred silence. Where kings struggled to control themselves, this new order promised control over everything else: wealth, violence, devotion, and fear. They were called knights, yet they lived like monks. They carried swords, yet spoke of humility. And the world, exhausted by chaos and craving certainty, trusted them completely. But power, no matter how disciplined, never forgets its nature. When authority grows without witness, it attracts suspicion. When secrecy deepens, it invites fear. And when an institution becomes too perfect, too silent, too secure, history begins to lean closer. In the flickering candlelight of the late medieval age, whispers returned, not about kings in chambers, but about knights behind walls, about hidden rights, about wealth without explanation, about loyalties stronger than law. The same silence that once protected rulers now turned against them. This is where the next chapter begins, not with desire, but with devotion, not with a single man, but with an order whose rise reshaped medieval Europe and whose fall revealed how fragile even the most disciplined power can be. As the night deepens and history lowers its voice once more, we turn our attention from thrones to temples, from kings who ruled in silence to knights who vowed it. This is the calm, shadowed story of the rise and fall of the Knights Templar.
They took vows of poverty, yet guarded unimaginable wealth. The contradiction sits quietly at the heart of the story, like a candle burning without wind. In the early 12th century, the roads to Jerusalem were dangerous, crowded with pilgrims whose faith was strong, but whose protection was weak. Out of this uncertainty emerged a small group of men who did something unusual, even by medieval standards. They renounced personal possessions, family ties, and worldly ambition, yet placed themselves at the center of movement, money, and power. They were neither fully monks nor fully soldiers. They were something new. Their beginnings were modest, a handful of knights sworn to protect travelers in the Holy Land, living simply, sleeping close to one another, eating in silence. Their vows were severe: obedience without question, chastity without exception, poverty without complaint. These vows were meant to strip the self away, leaving only service and faith. And at first, the world saw them as fragile, almost invisible. But invisibility has its advantages, because while kings ruled loudly and courts shimmered with ceremony, this order grew quietly. It learned to move without drawing attention, to exist between categories, neither noble nor peasant, neither church nor crown. Their discipline was absolute, their routines unchanging, and routine, when combined with belief, creates trust. Slowly, pilgrims placed their lives in Templar hands. Then merchants placed their goods. Then nobles placed their gold. The order became a bridge between danger and safety, between distance and return. They invented methods of transfer that felt miraculous to medieval minds. A pilgrim could deposit wealth in one city and retrieve it in another, guarded by vows and seals instead of armies. Poverty remained personal, wealth became collective, and because no individual owned it, no individual appeared corrupted by it. This distinction was subtle but powerful. Faith sanctified function, function multiplied influence. Soon the order stood at crossroads of roads, money, and belief. They built fortresses that looked like prayers carved into stone. They answered to no king, only to the Pope. Their secrecy was not theatrical, it was structural. Internal rituals remained internal. Decisions were made in chapter, not in public squares. This discretion made them reliable, and reliability in an age of chaos was priceless. Yet the same qualities that made the Templars trusted also made them unknowable. They had no families to speak for them, no personal heirs to explain intentions. Their loyalty was horizontal, not generational. To outsiders, they appeared unified, disciplined, and closed. And when power concentrates behind closed doors, curiosity begins to stir. Whispers were inevitable, not because evidence was clear, but because certainty was absent. The medieval mind feared what it could not observe, and the Templars were masters of not being observed. Their silence was not empty, it was purposeful. They spoke when needed, and not a word more. Over time, the order accumulated not just wealth, but exemption, from taxes, from local laws, from ordinary oversight. This was granted in good faith, slowly, incrementally. No single moment felt dangerous, but together they formed something unprecedented, an institution with money, land, soldiers, secrecy, and spiritual legitimacy. When power hides behind holiness, suspicion becomes inevitable. Still, at this stage, the suspicion was distant, unfocused. The order seemed necessary, useful, even holy. They embodied the medieval dream that faith could discipline force, that vows could restrain violence, that secrecy could protect goodness. Whether this dream was sustainable is a question history would answer later. For now, the Templars rose quietly, efficiently, and without scandal. And as the night settles deeper over this story, we remain at the beginning, at the moment when devotion felt pure, wealth felt justified, and silence felt safe.
As the order matured, wealth began to move in ways that left no footprints. Not through spectacle, but through trust. Not through conquest, but through deposits, letters, and seals. The medieval world was accustomed to seeing power display itself. Armies on roads, banners in cities, coins counted aloud. What unsettled people about the Knights Templar was not that they possessed wealth, but that their wealth rarely appeared. It flowed quietly, protected by vows and silence. Pilgrims handed over savings before long journeys, knowing they would be returned far away. Nobles stored treasures under Templar watch, confident that no family rivalry or local feud would touch them. Even kings, pressed by war or debt, treated the order as a neutral vault. Poverty remained the rule for individuals, but collectively, the order became indispensable. This created a new condition in medieval life: money without witnesses. No markets, no crowds, no public accounting, only ledgers kept within walls, spoken of in careful language. Such discretion was meant to protect trust. But trust, when it grows without transparency, becomes fragile. People began to notice patterns. Templar houses appeared at strategic crossings. Their fortresses guarded not only roads, but flows of goods, messages, and credit. They lent without spectacle and received without celebration. Interest, when discussed, was framed as service rather than profit. The moral language mattered. It reassured consciences. It softened a suspicion. Yet the more essential the order became, the more uncomfortable outsiders felt. They could see the results of Templar efficiency, but not the process. In a society shaped by visible hierarchy,
Invisibility signaled danger. Stories began to circulate quietly, not as accusations but as questions. How could men sworn to poverty command such resources? How could vows restrain temptation when money answered only to silence? These questions did not seek answers, they sought relief from uncertainty. The order responded not with explanations, but with consistency. Their routines did not change, their discipline remained strict, their silence held. In the short term, this steadiness reinforced trust. In the long term, it deepened unease. Because institutions that never explain themselves invite others to explain them instead. Medieval imagination filled the gaps gently at first. Symbols were reinterpreted. Handshakes, words, and rituals took on layered meanings. Nothing was proven, nothing needed to be. Suspicion, once planted, grows slowly, nourished by absence. The Templars had no families to defend their reputations, no public lives to contradict rumor. Their collective identity absorbed everything, praise and doubt alike. As wealth continued to circulate without witnesses, the order's position shifted subtly. They were no longer merely protectors of pilgrims, they were custodians of confidence itself. And confidence, once centralized, becomes power. This was not a conspiracy, it was an evolution. Step by careful step, the Templars became essential to systems larger than themselves. Banking before banks, logistics before states. Their holiness insulated them, but it also isolated them. They answered upward to the papacy and inward to their own rule. Horizontally, they remained opaque. The medieval world tolerated this arrangement because it needed it. Wars required funding, travel required safety, faith required guardians. But tolerance has limits. When circumstances change, yesterday's necessity becomes today's threat. As the 13th century progressed, monarchs grew more centralized, more jealous of authority. Debts accumulated, control tightened, and silence, once interpreted as discipline, began to resemble defiance. When power hides behind holiness, suspicion becomes inevitable. Not because holiness is false, but because power is rarely content to remain unseen. The stage was being set quietly. No proclamations, no open conflict, just a gradual shift in tone. The Templars continued their work, unaware or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge that the world around them was learning to look at silence differently. What once felt reassuring now felt evasive. And in that subtle change of feeling, history prepared its next movement.
Whispers do not arrive suddenly. They drift. They settle. They test the air before they speak. In medieval Europe, suspicion rarely announced itself with certainty. It moved through taverns, cloisters, and corridors as a feeling first, an unease without a name. By the time words appeared, the shape of fear had already formed. The Knights Templar understood silence as discipline. The world around them began to hear it as concealment. Whispers do not arrive suddenly. They drift. They settle. They test the air before they speak. In medieval Europe, suspicion rarely announced itself with certainty. It moved through taverns, cloisters, and corridors as a feeling first, an unease without a name. By the time words appeared, the shape of fear had already formed. The Knights Templar understood silence as discipline. The world around them began to hear it as concealment. Nothing had changed in the order's routines. The prayers were the same, the vows remained intact, the accounts stayed sealed. Yet perception shifted. And perception, once altered, rewrites reality without touching facts.
Stories began to circulate not as claims, but as possibilities. They asked what secrecy might protect. They wondered what rituals might mean being practiced beyond sight. Medieval society, deeply symbolic, read absence as intention. When something could not be seen, it must be hidden. When it was hidden, it must matter. The Knights Templars' internal ceremonies, ordinary to them, became extraordinary in the imagination of others. Symbols took on darker hues. Familiar gestures were reinterpreted. Silence, once proof of restraint, became evidence of refusal. Importantly, these whispers did not accuse the order of specific acts at first. They accused it of difference, of existing outside the normal flow of explanation. And in a world built on visible hierarchy, difference was destabilizing. The Church itself had taught people to fear heresy as a quiet thing, not a loud one. False belief was dangerous precisely because it hid beneath familiar forms. This theological anxiety bled easily into political life. When kings and princes looked at the Templars, they saw an institution that answered upward, not outward. An order with land, wealth, and armed men, yet bound by vows that no lay authority could penetrate. Fear did not need proof, it needed imbalance. The more the order denied rumors by maintaining silence, the more silence was read as strategy. Attempts at explanation would have violated their discipline. Refusal to explain confirmed suspicion. It was a closed circle, tightening slowly. Over time, questions sharpened. What oaths did they swear beyond the public ones? Why were new initiates admitted behind closed doors? Why did the order's wealth grow while its members remained personally poor? Each question was reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a narrative that felt inevitable. Medieval rumor did not aim to be accurate, it aimed to be coherent. And coherence, once achieved, resists correction. The Templars became a screen onto which anxieties were projected. Economic fear, religious uncertainty, political jealousy, all found shape in the idea of a powerful, silent brotherhood. Importantly, none of this required fabrication. It required only emphasis. Small details enlarged, neutral facts tilted. The absence of transparency did the rest. The order continued to function as it always had, but the context had changed. The world no longer wanted guardians, it wanted oversight. It wanted visibility. And it wanted power to justify itself in public. Silence, once protective, now isolated the Templars further. They had no mechanism for public defense. Their strength had never been persuasion, it had been reliability. But reliability cannot argue. It can only endure. As fear took shape, endurance was reinterpreted as defiance. History often turns not on actions, but on timing. Had these whispers emerged earlier, they might have faded. Had they emerged later, they might have been dismissed. But they arrived at a moment when monarchs were consolidating authority, when debts pressed heavily, and when patience with independent power had thinned. The shape of fear aligned perfectly with the needs of those who felt threatened. And so the whispers deepened. Not louder, deeper. They sank into official thought, into private counsel, into the quiet calculations of rulers. Nothing was yet decided. Nothing needed to be. Once fear acquires a shape, it only waits for permission to move.
Power rarely announces its intentions when it feels certain of the outcome. In the early 14th century, the machinery of authority moved quietly, without banners or sermons. The Knights Templar did not fall in battle. They were approached by questions framed as procedure. Inquiries replaced accusations. Summons replaced warnings. What looked administrative carried the weight of inevitability. The order's strength, its discipline and silence, now worked against it. When officials arrived, they brought documents, not swords, seals, not shouts. The language was calm, formal, almost gentle. It asked for cooperation in the name of clarity. But clarity, when demanded by power, often arrives already shaped. The Templars were used to scrutiny from within. Chapters examined conduct, rules corrected excess, but this scrutiny came from outside, guided by political necessity rather than spiritual concern. Testimonies were gathered in private, statements were recorded without witnesses. Fear traveled faster than facts, and uncertainty softened resistance. The order's members were trained to obey authority. They complied with summonses, trusting process, trusting hierarchy, trusting that silence would protect them, as it always had. Yet the process was no longer neutral. Questions repeated until answers bent. Isolation magnified doubt. What one man said under pressure echoed through the record, detached from context. The medieval legal world valued confession, but not the conditions under which it was given. Words mattered more than circumstances, and once words were written, they acquired a permanence that living voices could not undo. Importantly, this was not a public spectacle. The streets remained calm, churches held services, life continued. The absence of noise was deliberate. Noise invites sympathy. Silence encourages acceptance. Power understood this. By keeping proceedings contained, it prevented disorder and discouraged defense. The order's secrecy, once protective, now mirrored the secrecy of the trial itself. Outsiders saw only fragments, enough to feel concern, not enough to intervene. Meanwhile, political needs pressed heavily. Monarchs burdened by debt and ambition saw resolution in consolidation. Removing an independent institution promised relief and authority at once. The language of faith provided cover. Accusations framed as spiritual protection felt righteous, even merciful. The order was not portrayed as evil, but as mistaken. Correction, not destruction, was implied. Yet structures, once set in motion, rarely pause for nuance. As proceedings advanced, momentum replaced judgment. Officials followed precedents selectively. Confessions accumulated, stripped of contradiction. Silence from the order was interpreted as confirmation. What had once been discipline now appeared obstinacy, and obstinacy in the medieval imagination bordered on guilt. Still, even at this stage, nothing was fully resolved. The outcome felt near, but not announced. The trial existed in a suspended state where power tested its reach and watched for resistance. There was little. The order had no allies positioned to intervene quickly. Their independence had insulated them for decades, but it had also left them isolated when insulation turned to scrutiny. History often remembers downfall as a moment. In truth, it is a process, quiet, administrative, almost boring. And boredom is effective. It dulls outrage, it shortens memory, it allows decisions to harden without challenge. As the night deepens over this chapter, we remain within that process, not at the end, but in the narrowing corridor that leads toward it. The verdict has not yet spoken aloud, but the shape of it has already settled. As the Templars fell, there was no single sound to mark the moment, no final clash, no echoing cry. Their end arrived the way their power had lived, quietly, administratively, absorbed into the machinery of authority. Properties were reassigned, fortresses changed hands, ledgers were sealed, then reopened under new names. The men themselves faded into records that grew thinner with each passing year. Some were imprisoned, some were absorbed into other orders. Many simply disappeared from history's focus, their vows dissolved by decree rather than defeat. The medieval world did not mourn loudly, it adjusted. Stone by stone, responsibility was redistributed. Wealth did not vanish, it moved. Faith did not collapse, it was redirected. Churches, crowns, and rival institutions inherited what the order had built. The roads remained, the systems endured, only the name was removed. This is how power prefers to change, without interruption. The fall of the Knight Templar revealed something deeper than scandal or conspiracy. It revealed that holiness does not protect power from politics. Silence does not shield authority from fear. And discipline, however perfect, cannot outlast suspicion once suspicion is useful. The accusations themselves mattered less than their timing. They arrived when rulers needed resources, when centralized control was the future, and when independent obedience had become intolerable. Faith was not rejected, it was reorganized. What the Templars had embodied, devotion, secrecy, efficiency, was not destroyed, it was claimed. Other orders expanded, monarchs tightened oversight. The Church refined its reach. The idea of a self-governing holy force faded, replaced by structures more visible, more accountable, and more obedient to centralized power. The medieval knight absorbed this transition smoothly. There were no riots, no sudden awakenings. Most people never understood what had truly happened. They only felt that something solid had been removed and replaced with something heavier. The memory of the order lingered as absence. Empty halls, reassigned cloisters, symbols stripped from stone. And in that absence, imagination thrived. Stories filled the gaps. Legends grew where records thinned. The Templars became larger after their fall than during their existence. But history, when listened to softly, tells a calmer story. Not of hidden treasure or secret survival, but of redirection, of how faith, once concentrated in one silent order, flowed outward again into institutions better aligned with emerging power. The world did not lose belief, it lost an intermediary. As we drift toward the close of this chapter, it becomes clear that the rise and fall of the Templars was not an anomaly, it was a pattern. Power gathered in silence. Power attracted fear. Power was dismantled without noise. And then power reappeared elsewhere, reshaped, renamed, and justified anew. This pattern echoes through medieval history and beyond it. It prepares us to understand why kings, churches, and later institutions learned to fear independent devotion, why secrecy became suspect, why faith was increasingly bound to oversight. As stone and faith were redirected elsewhere, the medieval world settled into a new equilibrium, one less idealistic, more controlled, and far more cautious of those who vow obedience without explanation. The night grows quiet again. The order has vanished, but the lesson remains, resting gently beneath the surface of history, waiting to be noticed by those who listen closely enough.
This cathedral was not built quickly. It was built patiently, like belief itself. When the first stone was laid beside the Seine in the year 1163, no one alive could imagine the finished form. Not the bishop who blessed the ground, not the mason who lifted the hammer, not even the king who watched from a distance. The building of Notre-Dame de Paris began as an act of faith without an ending. In medieval Europe, time was not measured by deadlines, but by generations. A cathedral was never meant to belong to one lifetime. It was meant to outlast memory. Stone by stone, belief learned how to wait. The workers who arrived at dawn did not carry blueprints of the whole. They carried fragments, arches, ribs, columns, tasks small enough to complete, large enough to matter. Each mason shaped blocks that would disappear into walls he would never see finished. Each sculptor carved faces whose expressions were meant for centuries ahead. They did not ask what the final cathedral would look like. They were not allowed to. Knowledge was distributed carefully, just like labor. To see everything at once was unnecessary. To obey the rhythm was enough. This is how faith became architecture, not through vision, but through submission to process. For nearly 2 centuries, Notre-Dame rose slowly, patiently, without urgency. Styles changed, kings died, plagues passed, wars interrupted work, then released it again. The cathedral absorbed these pauses without complaint. Time itself became a material. Stone learned to hold silence, and silence learned to carry authority. To the medieval mind, this patience was not inefficiency, it was proof. Only something sacred could justify a project that ignored human urgency. Only belief could ask men to work knowing their grandchildren might still be carving when the roof finally closed. In this way, Notre-Dame was more than a church, it was a lesson, a daily reminder that power did not need to hurry, that control did not need force, that permanence was achieved not by speed, but by continuity. As the walls climbed higher, so did the idea they carried. Faith was no longer only preached, it was embodied. It stood in the center of the city, unavoidable, immovable. You could not walk Paris without orienting yourself around it. Bells marked time, shadows marked direction. The building trained the population quietly, teaching where to look, when to pause, and how small a single life was within a larger order. No king ruled for 182 years. No dynasty remained unbroken that long. But the cathedral continued. This endurance gave it a different kind of authority, not the authority of command, but of presence. It did not argue, it waited, and in waiting it shaped behavior. The workers who built it lived modestly, disciplined by routine and ritual. Their labor was repetitive, almost meditative. Chisel, measure, lift, repeat. Over decades, the act of building became a form of prayer. The structure did not demand belief through words, it imposed it through scale. You stood beneath the vaults and felt the weight of something larger than yourself. Not threatening, simply undeniable. This is how power learned to turn invisible, by becoming normal, by embedding itself into stone, into daily life, into the skyline. Notre-Dame did not control through fear, it controlled through inevitability. It suggested that faith had always been here and always would be, that resistance was temporary, but stone was patient. As the first generations of builders died and new ones took their place, the original intentions blurred. What remained was continuity. The cathedral no longer belonged to its founders, it belonged to the system that sustained it, and that system was precise, hierarchical, and silent. Each person knew their role, each role was replaceable. The building advanced regardless of who held the tools. This is the quiet genius of medieval spiritual power. It did not rely on personalities, it relied on structure. Notre-Dame was not finished quickly because it was never meant to be. It was meant to teach Europe how to think in centuries, not moments. And as the night settles gently over the stones, we begin to sense that this cathedral was not only a house of worship, it was a rehearsal, a demonstration of how belief could be carved into the world so deeply that no single generation could remove it.
As the cathedral rose, the city learned how to arrange itself around it. Paris did not merely host Notre-Dame de Paris, it slowly reorganized its sense of direction, rhythm, and meaning in response to it. Streets curved toward its towers. Markets settled within sight of its walls. Bells replaced the sun as markers of time. Morning was no longer simply dawn, it was the first bell. Evening was no longer the dark, it was the last echo fading across stone. In this way, faith did not need to speak loudly. It structured the day. People learned when to gather,
when to pause, when to lower their voices, and when to look upward. This training was gentle, almost invisible. No orders were issued, no punishments announced. The building itself did the work. Its size instructed humility. Its permanence suggested inevitability. Its presence made alternatives feel temporary. To medieval Parisians, Notre-Dame was not a destination, it was an axis. Everything else rotated around it. Processions began there. Oaths were sworn beneath its vaults. Justice borrowed its solemnity. Even royal ceremonies sought its shadow, as if legitimacy needed stone to feel complete. Kings came and went, but the cathedral remained unmoved. This imbalance taught a subtle lesson. Authority rooted in faith outlasted authority rooted in blood. The Church understood this deeply. By placing spiritual power at the physical center of the city, it ensured that belief was never abstract, it was spatial. You could measure your distance from it, you could feel its gravity. And gravity, once established, does not need force to pull. The cathedral's interior reinforced the lesson. Light filtered through stained glass and controlled colors, shaping emotion without words. Height elongated silence. Sound softened into reverence. The architecture guided the body as much as the mind, where to stand, where to kneel, where to look. Even doubt, if it entered, was absorbed by scale. It felt small, manageable. The builders understood none of this in theory. They understood it through repetition. Each stone placed in accordance with rules inherited from those before them. No single craftsman designed the effect, yet the effect endured. This is how systems succeed, not through intention, but through consistency. Over generations, the cathedral became a reference point for truth itself. To say something happened at Notre-Dame gave it weight. To bury someone there gave memory permanence. To challenge its authority required more than courage. It required imagination strong enough to envision Paris without it. Few possessed that imagination. Most did not need to. Life flowed smoothly when aligned with the structure. Resistance, by contrast, felt like disorientation. As the centuries passed, the building gathered layers of meaning. It survived fires, unrest, neglect, and repair. Each survival reinforced the same message: faith waits, faith endures. Faith does not hurry to convince. It allows time to do the persuading. This patience was its most powerful tool. People were born under its shadow and died within its sound. Their personal struggles felt brief compared to stone that did not age as they did. The cathedral normalized obedience, not by threat, but by scale. It made submission feel reasonable, even comforting. In this way, Notre-Dame functioned as a silent governor. It did not legislate, it oriented. And orientation, once internalized, becomes habit. Habit becomes culture. Culture becomes invisible law. This is the quiet architecture of control, not imposed, but inherited. As night settles over Paris and the bells fall silent, the city still holds the shape it learned centuries ago. Streets remember, stone remembers, and belief, once carved into daily life, does not require belief to be actively renewed. It persists through pattern alone.
As generations passed, the cathedral's authority began to exceed that of any ruler who entered its shadow. Kings were crowned, married, mourned, and judged beneath its vaults, yet none of them owned it. They borrowed its gravity. Standing within Notre-Dame de Paris, even monarchs adjusted their posture, softened their voices, and submitted to ritual older than their lineage. This was not humiliation, it was instruction. The building taught that power, to endure, must appear patient, impersonal, and inevitable. Thrones were temporary, stone was not. While crowns passed from head to head, the cathedral remained unchanged in its purpose. This contrast quietly reordered the hierarchy of medieval life. Authority rooted in blood sought legitimacy from authority rooted in belief. In this exchange, faith gained permanence, and kings gained reassurance. The price was dependence. Over time, Notre-Dame became the stage upon which power validated itself. Decrees felt heavier when announced near its walls. Penitence felt sincere beneath its arches. Even rebellion measured itself against the space it opposed. To defy the cathedral was to defy the order of time itself. This is how spiritual architecture outgrew political will. It did not argue with rulers, it outlasted them. The cathedral's ceremonies folded the state into a rhythm it could not control. Bells synchronized civic life. Feast days organized calendars. Silence during worship disciplined crowds. None of this required enforcement. Participation felt natural because it was habitual. Habit, repeated across centuries, becomes instinct, and instinct resists challenge. The builders had unknowingly created a machine for continuity. Each repair reinforced legitimacy. Each restoration renewed consent. Fire and damage did not weaken authority, they deepened it by inviting care. People protect what they inherit. In protecting the cathedral, they protected the system it represented. This is the paradox of sacred stone. It appears passive, yet it governs. It does not command, yet it directs. It does not threaten, yet it prevails. Medieval rulers sensed this. Some aligned themselves closely with the cathedral, staging processions and rites to absorb its aura. Others tested distance, discovering that separation felt like loss. The building was not neutral ground, it was calibrated. It elevated certain voices and quieted others. It framed confession and judgment alike. By hosting the most solemn moments of public life, it standardized emotion itself. How grief should look, how joy should sound, how obedience should feel. In doing so, Notre-Dame became a moral instrument, not by decree, but by design. The faithful did not need to be told what mattered. They felt it in their bodies when they entered the space. The ceiling lifted the gaze. The floor anchored the feet. The air cooled urgency. Power learned that when belief is embodied, it no longer needs persuasion. It needs maintenance. And maintenance favors institutions over individuals. No single king could claim authorship of this authority. No single bishop could alter it quickly. That slowness was the point. Change arrived gradually, masked as care. The cathedral absorbed reforms without appearing to change, teaching a crucial lesson. Adaptability preserves dominance when it moves slowly enough. By the late medieval period, Notre-Dame was not merely a church among others, it was a reference standard, a place against which legitimacy was measured. Political conflict sought its mediation. Social tensions sought its calm. The building had become a repository of trust, not because it was flawless, but because it was constant. Constancy reassures. Reassurance pacifies. Pacification sustains order. Thus, power completed its transformation, from kings who ruled by command to institutions that ruled by presence, from desire that demanded to stone that waited. And waiting proved stronger. As night settles and the city quiets, the cathedral continues its work without movement. It stands as proof that the most enduring authority is the one that convinces people it has always been there and always will be.
By the time the final stones were set into place, no one remembered the hands that had begun the work. Notre-Dame de Paris stood complete not as a monument to builders, but as a monument to duration itself. 182 years of patience had taught Europe something subtle and irreversible: that the most reliable power does not argue, conquer, or rush, it waits. Stone does not persuade, it outlasts, and in outlasting, it becomes authority. The cathedral no longer needed belief to be defended, it simply existed, shaping behavior through presence alone. Children grew up assuming it had always been there. Elders died assuming it always would be. In that assumption, obedience became effortless. This was the final refinement of spiritual control. Not command, but normalization. Faith was no longer something you chose each day. It was the environment you breathed. The building's endurance eclipsed kings, dynasties, and crises. When rulers quarreled, the cathedral remained silent. When plagues arrived, it remained standing. When borders shifted, it stayed fixed. Each survival reinforced the same lesson: time favors structures that do not hurry. Europe learned to trust what waited. Yet this lesson carried a cost. Power that embeds itself so deeply becomes difficult to question. To challenge stone feels futile. To resist time feels childish. And so authority, once carved into architecture, no longer needed to justify itself. It had become background. But history does not move in a single material. While Europe learned to freeze belief into stone, the world beyond its shores was changing its relationship with power altogether. Trade routes widened, ships grew larger, horizons expanded. The sea, unlike stone, does not wait. It moves, it adapts, it rewards speed, negotiation, and risk. Authority on land learned patience, authority on water learned flexibility, and flexibility would soon prove more dangerous than permanence. As cathedrals taught populations to submit quietly, oceans taught individuals to improvise. The silence of stone contrasted sharply with the noise of sails in markets. Control on land relied on continuity. Control at sea relied on momentum. These two logics could not remain separate forever. The age that followed would test which form of power traveled farther. As we let the cathedral recede into the night, we do not abandon its lesson. We carry it forward. Because the sea, too, would learn how to build authority without asking permission. Not with stone, but with rules. Not with patience, but with precision. And not over centuries, but within a single lifetime. The next story belongs to a woman who never carved her power into buildings, yet ruled more people than many kings. Her authority did not stand still. It moved with the tide. And where stone waited, she acted. But while Europe carved faith into stone, another kind of power rose on the sea. She began with nothing. Not even a name history respected. Before the sea learned her commands, before fleets aligned their sails to her will, she existed at the lowest edge of recorded life. Zheng entered history from a place that official history rarely preserves with care. She was born into obscurity, and later into a profession that society preferred to forget, even while depending on it. No noble lineage carried her forward. No sacred vow protected her.
No institution prepared her ascent, and that absence would become her advantage. Unlike kings who inherited power, or knights who were shaped by ritual, or builders who served belief across generations, she learned power from exposure. She observed desire at its most honest. She listened to men who spoke freely only when they believed themselves unimportant. In rooms where respect dissolved, truth often remained. This was her first education. She did not rule by faith, because faith had never ruled her life. She did not rule by tradition, because tradition had offered her nothing. She ruled by understanding how people behave when nothing restrains them. When she married the pirate Zheng, her rise did not begin with romance, but with negotiation. Even then, she was not granted authority. She took responsibility. After his death, the expected order was collapse. Fleets usually fracture when a single male leader disappears. Loyalty dissolves. Violence follows. But she did something unprecedented. She stabilized desire with structure. Where chaos expected bloodshed, she introduced rules. Clear rules. Brutally consistent rules. Theft within the fleet was punished. Abuse was punished. Disobedience was punished. Not emotionally, not arbitrarily, but predictably. In doing so, she replaced fear of leaders with fear of disorder. This is a crucial distinction. Kings demanded obedience because of birth. The church demanded obedience because of belief. Zheng Yi demanded obedience because it worked. Her authority did not claim holiness, it promised survival. And survival, unlike ideology, requires no persuasion. Tens of thousands followed her, not because they admired her, but because her system reduced uncertainty. On the sea, uncertainty kills. She understood that power is not loud, it is reliable. This is where her story becomes the perfect counterweight to medieval Europe. While cathedrals taught patience and submission through permanence, she taught loyalty through immediacy. While kings ruled by inherited desire, she ruled by regulated desire. She did not deny human appetite, she organized it. She understood that people do not abandon ambition, they align it with systems that reward restraint. Her fleet became a moving state, not because it claimed territory, but because it enforced order wherever it arrived. Governments negotiated with her not out of admiration, but out of recognition. She controlled behavior more efficiently than they did. This is the uncomfortable truth history often softens. Legitimacy follows effectiveness. She paid the price of this clarity. She was never celebrated while alive. She was feared, bargained with, then slowly erased. When she retired, history did not know where to place her. A woman who ruled without crown, without faith, without walls. She did not fit the moral architecture of traditional power, and so her name drifted. But beneath that drift lies the final lesson of our long journey through kings, knights, builders, and pirates. Power does not belong to virtue alone. It belongs to those who understand desire well enough to shape it, faith deeply enough to redirect it, and consequences clearly enough to enforce them. She began with nothing, and because of that, she learned everything power refuses to teach those born into it.
Desire does not disappear when power takes shape. It only changes its route. What distinguished the rule of Zheng Yi was not that she suppressed desire, but that she gave it borders. On the sea, where horizons erase promises and storms rewrite intentions, unchecked desire fractures quickly. Greed becomes mutiny, ambition becomes betrayal, fear becomes chaos. She understood this not as theory, but as consequence. Her laws did not appeal to virtue, they appealed to outcomes. Every rule was a calculation, every punishment a signal, not of cruelty, but of certainty. Certainty calms, certainty reduces imagination, and imagination, when left unchecked among armed men, is dangerous. By limiting what could be imagined, she limited rebellion. This was her quiet genius. While medieval kings relied on lineage to command obedience, and the church relied on belief to discipline conscience, she relied on predictability to govern behavior. Her code was simple enough to be remembered, strict enough to be respected, and consistent enough to be trusted. Trust in this context did not mean affection, it meant reliability under pressure. The fleet learned that survival was not a gamble, it was a contract. Break the contract and consequences arrived without delay. Honor it and the sea became navigable. In this way, desire was not crushed, it was redirected. Loot became collective, risk became managed, violence became regulated. The result was stability without sanctity. She built order without claiming moral superiority. That absence mattered, because moral claims invite debate, rules invite compliance. Her authority did not need sermons, it needed enforcement, and enforcement, when consistent, becomes belief's substitute. Over time, the fleet internalized the code. What began as fear matured into habit. Habit hardened into culture. Culture outlived individuals. This is the moment when power detaches from personality. Even had she vanished suddenly, the system would have persisted, at least for a while. That persistence terrified empires more than her reputation ever could. Governments can negotiate with leaders, they struggle against systems. European powers, accustomed to cathedrals and crowns, found themselves facing an authority that moved, adapted, and recalculated faster than doctrine. On land, control required time. At sea, control required timing. She mastered timing. She chose when to fight, when to retreat, when to bargain. Desire, once organized, becomes leverage. She offered mercy not as kindness, but as incentive. Amnesty not as forgiveness, but as absorption. Even her retirement followed the logic of her rule. She did not cling to power when it became costly. She negotiated exit. She preserved life. This too was a rule: survival over spectacle. The price of such clarity was memory. History prefers drama to structure. It remembers crowns and collapses more readily than contracts that worked. Her life unsettled moral storytelling. A woman who rose without divine sanction, ruled without throne, enforced order without holiness. Where does such a figure belong? Too disciplined for legend, too effective for comfort. And so she drifts at the margins of popular history. But margins are where patterns reveal themselves most clearly. Her story exposes the cost of power stripped of illusion. It demands constant attention, constant enforcement, constant adaptation. There is no sacred buffer, no inherited patience. When rules fail, consequences are immediate. This is the price paid when authority is honest about itself. And yet, for a time, it worked. Better than many kingdoms, better than many churches. Desire was not denied, it was understood. Faith was not invoked, it was replaced. Power was not justified, it was demonstrated. As we drift deeper into the night, her fleet becomes less a story of piracy and more a study of governance. A reminder that order does not require sanctity, only clarity. And clarity, like the sea, is unforgiving to those who misread it.
Every form of power demands payment. The only difference lies in when the bill arrives. Kings delayed the cost by wrapping authority in lineage. Churches postponed it by cloaking control in belief. Builders buried it beneath stone and time. Zheng Yi Sao accepted the cost immediately. That was her strength and her burden. Power without illusion offers no shelter. There was no divine forgiveness to soften failure, no inherited patience to absorb mistakes. Every decision carries weight, and every error echoes quickly. She ruled by clarity, but clarity is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance. Laws must be enforced every day, not remembered ceremonially once a year. Discipline must be visible, or it dissolves. On the sea, reputation is fragile. One moment of weakness spreads faster than any fleet. She understood this, and so she could never rest inside her authority. Power followed her everywhere because it depended on her presence to function. This is the hidden price of rule without myth. It demands attention until the end. Desire, though organized, never disappears. It waits. Crew members tested boundaries. Allies measured advantage. Enemies searched for hesitation. She navigated not only waters, but human impatience. Where cathedrals could afford centuries to shape obedience, she had only seasons. Where kings could lean on tradition, she leaned on consistency. And consistency leaves no room for mercy disguised as kindness. Every exception weakens the rule. Every pause invites challenge. Over time, this pressure accumulates. Power becomes heavy when it cannot delegate its legitimacy. She did not suffer defeat in the way history prefers. There was no dramatic collapse, no final battle that could be painted into legend. Instead, she chose something quieter. She negotiated. She stepped away. This, too, was a payment. To leave power voluntarily is to accept that control is temporary, not sacred. Many rulers fail this test. They cling and are destroyed. She understood that survival sometimes requires surrendering dominance before it turns against you. Her retreat was not weakness, it was alignment with reality. The world had changed. Empires adapted. Naval forces reorganized. The conditions that once rewarded her system began to erode. Rather than wait for erosion to become catastrophe, she exited. History struggles with this choice because it resists moral framing. Was she redeemed? Was she defeated? Neither. She simply concluded the contract when it no longer served its purpose. That is the logic of power stripped of illusion. It begins when effective. It ends when ineffective. No prophecy, no destiny, just consequence. This honesty unsettles traditional storytelling. We prefer power to fall dramatically or to ascend righteously. Her story does neither. It fades. And fading feels unsatisfying unless one listens closely. Because in that quiet exit lies the final cost, erasure. Without myth, memory weakens. Without monuments, authority dissolves into footnotes. She paid for her effectiveness with anonymity. She left behind no cathedral, no dynasty, no sacred text, only a pattern, a reminder that power can exist without holiness, without bloodline, without permanence, and that such power must be constantly renewed or consciously relinquished. This is the last lesson before rest. Power that refuses illusion gains control, but loses comfort. It works, but it does not console. It protects, but it does not promise eternity. And so when the sea finally releases her name back into silence, it does not do so with judgment, only with balance. The bill has been paid, the account closed.
Kings ruled by inheritance, knights served by oath, builders shaped belief across centuries,
and pirates like Zheng Yi Sao ruled by understanding the present moment with ruthless clarity. History records them differently because history prefers certain costumes of power. Crowns feel familiar, cathedrals feel noble, armies feel inevitable. But when the noise fades and the night grows quiet, their stories begin to resemble one another more than they differ. Each sought control over uncertainty. Each responded to desire, fear, and faith in the language available to them. And each paid a price for the form of power they chose. Kings inherited authority, but inherited its decay as well. Their reigns were haunted by succession, betrayal, and the anxiety of replacement. Knights devoted themselves to ideals larger than life, only to discover that devotion often demands obedience without protection. Builders labored patiently, believing they served eternity, yet their names dissolved into stone they could never own. And pirates built order without illusion, only to learn that clarity requires constant vigilance and leaves little behind when it ends. Power, in every age, promises more than it delivers. It promises safety, meaning, or permanence. What it delivers is structure, and structure always asks for payment. Sometimes the payment is blood, sometimes faith, sometimes memory itself. Medieval Europe carved belief into stone, trusting that weight and time would hold society together. On the sea, belief dissolved quickly, replaced by rules sharp enough to survive storms. Neither path was pure, neither was free. They were responses to the same question asked in different ways. How do humans live with uncertainty? Some answer with crowns, some with walls, some with laws. History does not judge these answers evenly. It remembers the grand and forgets the effective. It elevates symbols and softens systems. Yet tonight, judgment is unnecessary. The night does not ask us to choose sides. It asks us to listen gently and then let go. These figures, kings, knights, builders, pirates, are no longer competing for our attention. Their struggles have settled into pattern, rhythm, and quiet. The anxieties that once drove them have dissolved into the background of time. Power no longer needs to prove itself. Desire no longer needs to be restrained. Faith no longer needs to persuade. The price has already been paid. And so, as the world outside slows, we allow these stories to rest. We do not carry their burdens forward. We do not inherit their fears. We simply acknowledge that they lived, they ruled, they built, they adapted, and then they passed. History remembers them differently, but sleep makes them equal. In sleep, crowns weigh nothing. Stone grows soft. The sea becomes still. If you are listening from far away, in a quiet room, at the edge of night, there is nothing more you need to understand. There is nothing you need to hold. Let the kings rest. Let the knights rest. Let the builders rest. Let the pirates rest. And as their stories fade into calm, allow your own thoughts to loosen, your breathing to slow, and the night to take over gently. If these stories have kept you company, you are welcome to return another night. For now, there is no need to follow, decide, or remember. Simply rest.